Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I'd like to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference for giving me an opportunity to refresh all your memories about this very important topic of nerve conduction and the mechanism of local anesthetic action. The outline of my talk will be to talk about the morphology of a spinal nerve, the physiology of excitation and conduction of an action potential, the local anesthetics and how they act. All of you are aware that a spinal nerve has mainly three distinct parts: the cell body. A cell body, as you can see here, the dendrites and the axon. The important aspects of the axon are this axon hillock and the initial segment, which are responsible for the generation of the action potential. If you were to take a typical S1 anterior horn cell, if the cell body is the size of a tennis ball, the dendrites will be enough to fill a large room, and the axon will be a mile long, but we have to keep in mind that it will be only 13 millimeters in diameter. This classification, I'm sure everybody is very much aware. The nerve fibers are classified basically into three groups, the A, B, C, and the A is further classified into alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, and these are classified based on the nerve diameter. So it ranges from 0.5 to 1 micrometer for a C fiber to approximately 15 to 20 micrometer for a alpha fiber, and this determines the speed of conduction of these nerves. Now, this is a supraclavicular area of brachial plexus showing the bunch of nerves here, the subclavian artery and the first rib. Now, we look at the ultrasound picture, we see this as black circles. But what are these black circles? Now, a black circle that we see in the ultrasound is actually a nerve which contains all these structures inside. So, coming from inside, it actually contains an axon which has got myelinated layer around it. This is encased into fascicles which are covered by perineurium, and they are grouped together to form a nerve. So, when we give a local anesthetic block, it has to traverse through approximately 5 layers. It has to traverse through 5 layers to reach the axonal membrane where the local anesthetic works. Now, the axonal cell membrane is a typical membrane, cell membrane with a bilipid layer and proteins which traverses the entire cell membrane, and we will come to these proteins in detail when we talk about the sodium channel. The other important structure that we need to keep in mind when talking about morphology is this important cell called Schwann cell. Now, this is an electron microscopy photograph of an axon with a Schwann cell, and you can see the relative size of the axon and the Schwann cell and the myelin which surrounds the axon in approximately 100 layers. Now, an unmyelinated axon has a Schwann cell associated with it, but it doesn't have the number of layers here that we see in this electron microscopy photograph. A Schwann cell is approximately spanning around 100 micrometers, and it creates gaps in the nerve cell membrane called nodes of Ranvier, where the concentration of sodium channels is very high. Coming to excitation and conduction, we need to know initially what happens at rest with the cell membrane. Now, this is a rough estimate of the ionic balance across a cell membrane, the intracellular containing more potassium ions and the extracellular containing more sodium ions. And in a resting state, the cell membrane has a potassium channels which are open but relatively impermeable to sodium because the sodium channels are closed. So, at rest, what guides this membrane potential, which is positive outside and negative inside? It is mainly the diffusional force which is acting on this potassium balance, and the electrical force which is trying to draw the potassium inside. So, this balance of potassium is what creates the resting membrane potential. So, in summary, at rest, the cell membrane is impermeable to sodium ions, it is selectively permeable to potassium ions, and there is a pump which acts to keep this gradient, and the cell membrane behaves more like a potassium electrode. And the potassium has got a potential of approximately minus 85.7 millivolts, and the cell membrane rests somewhere close to this. Now, coming to the most important aspect of my talk, which is the sodium channel. This sodium channel is a voltage-gated ion channel. It's a protein which traverses the cell membrane. If we look at a sodium channel from the top, we can see it has got 4 domains, and each domain has got 6 cylinders. Now, these cylinders are called alpha helices, and they traverse through the membrane, and they play a very important role when it comes to the action of the sodium channel. And the sodium channel has got a central pore inside which lets the sodium ion pass through. So, we can think of sodium channel as a small machine. So, it's like any other machine, it's got different parts. So, it has got an ion selector. So, this selects only the sodium channel. So, it doesn't let calcium, potassium or anything cross through that. It has got a voltage sensor. Now, this voltage sensor is in fact one of the alpha helices. It is a S4 alpha helix of a domain which senses the voltage change across the membrane and opens the channel. And it has got a gate, just like a gate, wherever you in a house, wherever you see. It has got a gate, but this gate has got a speciality that it is linked to this voltage sensor. And whenever the voltage sensor tells the gate to open, the gate will open. But there's another gate here inside, which is called the inactivation gate, which works differently, which I'll come to in a minute. So, the sequence of events when an action potential takes place is that whenever the transmembrane potential drops below minus 50 millivolts from minus 70, the voltage sensors let the gate open, the green gate which you see here. But when the transmembrane potential rises to about plus 30 millivolts, the inactivation gate, which is the other gate, closes the sodium flux. So, this is just a very brief diagram which is not a true representation of what happens with regards to the size, but it shows us that in the initial phase, whenever an action potential is generated, sodium channels start opening, but when they reach an voltage of approximately minus 55 millivolts, they start opening in large numbers, causing a spike which is called the action potential. And when the action potential reaches approximately plus 30 millivolts, the inactivation gate of the sodium channels close and the potassium channels open, causing the repolarization phase of the action potential. And this action potential propagates along the nerve fiber, and it behaves according to this all or none law, which is that once the threshold potential is reached of minus 55 millivolts, the action potential is produced. Further increases produce no further change or increase in amplitude of the action potential, and the action potential fails to occur if the stimulus is sub-threshold. And the conduction of an action potential is very similar to how a gunpowder wick lights, and if you see a cartoon of a Tom and Jerry or anything, you can see that the wick, when it lights, it goes in a constant speed. That is the speed that the action potential goes through the nerve fiber. And the importance of myelin is shown in this diagram in that it causes what is called a saltatory conduction, wherein the action potential jumps from one node of Ranvier to another node of Ranvier, because the myelin produces insulation in between, and the concentration of sodium channels is approximately 2,500 channels per square micrometer when compared to just around 20 channels in the other places where there is no nodes of Ranvier. And this causes an increase in conduction velocity up to 10 times. So, coming to local anesthetics, there are bases which are poorly soluble in water, therefore, we get them as hydrochloride salts. The pKa and the tissue pH determine the free base and cation. So, when I say this statement, it's actually the pKa is the pH at which the local anesthetic is existing half in a base state and half in a cationic state. So, how do they act? They act by binding to the inner vestibule of the sodium channel. Now, there are various theories as to how this local anesthetic gets there, but the most accepted theory is that it crosses the cell membrane, enters the cytoplasm and then binds it from inside. So, does charge matter? We know that we sometimes mix bicarbonate with local anesthetics. Now, the rationale behind that is actually shown in this diagram. The non-ionized or unionized form of the local anesthetic is required to cross the cell membrane. So, you can see here it exists in both ionic and non-ionic or unionized form. The unionized form is in fact responsible for crossing the cell membrane. Once it crosses the cell membrane, it again converts itself into an ionized form, which actually dictates its potency. So, the speed of onset is dictated by the amount of unionized form. The potency is dictated by the ionized form inside the cytoplasm. The open and inactivated states of the sodium channel, once the action potential has taken place, bind local anesthetic more avidly. By selective binding to a channel state, it stabilizes that state. So, the local anesthetic binding is increased by depolarization because more binding sites are accessible and the drug dissociation is slower. So in conclusion, the effects of channel blockade causes the threshold for excitation to increase, the impulse conduction slows down, the rate of rise of action potential declines, and the ability to generate an action potential is abolished or cancelled. And this paper actually changed our view of how local anesthetics bind and the susceptibility of block to different fibers. So now this paper has changed our views, and we know now that the A gamma fibers are more susceptible to block, followed by the A delta and the remaining fibers. Thank you.